academic pressure and family expectations can create a perfect storm of deception and murder. Jennifer Pan. On November 8, 2010, Markham, Ontario became the scene of a hit that would expose the dark side of the model minority myth. The mastermind was Jennifer Pan, a 24-year-old who orchestrated the murder of her parents to escape their suffocating expectations and inherit $500,000. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment crime. It was a carefully planned execution disguised as a home invasion. But how did a seemingly perfect daughter become capable of such calculated evil? Jennifer had been living a double life for years, pretending to be a high-achieving student while actually dropping out of university. Her strict Vietnamese immigrant parents had impossibly high expectations, demanding perfect grades and complete obedience. Jennifer felt trapped between their demands and her own failures, choosing deception over honesty until the lies became impossible to maintain. Jennifer hired hitmen David Milvaganam, Eric Carty, and Lenford Crawford, involving her boyfriend Daniel Wong in the plot. The attack resulted in the death of her mother Bitch Pan and left her father Han Pan permanently blinded. Jennifer claimed she was also a victim, bound and helpless during the home invasion, but investigators quickly saw through her elaborate lies. Police discovered inconsistencies in her story, mobile device tracking, and over 100 text messages between Jennifer and Wong in the 6 hours before the attack. The digital evidence painted a clear picture of premeditation and coordination that contradicted her victim narrative. After a 10-month trial beginning in March 2014, Jennifer was found guilty in December 2014 and sentenced to life with parole after 25 years. In May 2023, the Court of Appeal ordered a retrial for first-degree murder while upholding the attempted murder conviction, confirmed by the Supreme Court in April 2025. She remains at Grand Valley Institution for Women, maintaining her innocence despite overwhelming evidence of her guilt. But our next case involves a teenager whose desire for notoriety led to a massacre that shocked an entire nation. Nicholas Prosper. On September 13, 2023, Luton, England witnessed a family massacre that revealed the terrifying mind of a would-be mass shooter. The perpetrator was Nicholas Prosper, an 18-year-old who killed his mother and siblings with a shotgun while planning an even deadlier attack on a primary school. This wasn't just family violence. It was a stepping stone to something far worse that could have claimed dozens of innocent lives. But what transforms a teenager into someone capable of planning to massacre children? Nicholas was obsessed with mass shootings and serial killers, driven by a desire for notoriety and influenced by undiagnosed autism spectrum disorder. He used a double-barreled shotgun to kill his mother, Juliana Falcon, 48, his sister Giselle Prosper, 13, and his brother Kyle Prosper, 16. But the family murders were just the beginning of his twisted plan to surpass historical massacres and achieve the notoriety he craved. Nicholas fired 7 cartridges, reloading twice during the attack, and stabbed his brother Kyle over 100 times after shooting him. The level of overkill suggested a complete disconnect from reality and humanity. After murdering his family, he intended to proceed to St. Joseph's Primary School to carry out a mass shooting that could have claimed dozens of innocent children's lives, potentially becoming one of the deadliest school attacks in British history. Nicholas was arrested later that day after fleeing the scene, with police finding the shotgun and 33 cartridges hidden in bushes. His detailed plans for the school shooting were uncovered during the investigation, revealing the full scope of his intended massacre and the innocent lives that were saved by his early capture. On February 24, 2025, Nicholas pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder and weapons charges. Mrs. Justice Chima Grubb sentenced him to life with a minimum term of 49 years on March 19, 2025. The sentence was referred under the unduly lenient sentence scheme but upheld by the Court of Appeal on July 16, 2025, ensuring this potential mass shooter will spend most of his life behind bars in a UK prison. Our next case shows how radical extremism can poison young minds and turn children against their own families. Lisa Borch. On October 8, 2014, Kvissel, Denmark became the scene of a murder that would expose the reach of ISIS propaganda into European homes. The killer was Lisa Borch, a 15-year-old who stabbed her mother at least 20 times with the help of her 29-year-old boyfriend. This wasn't typical teenage rebellion. It was radicalization turned deadly, showing how online extremism can corrupt young minds. But how did a Danish teenager become so influenced by terrorism that she would kill her own mother? Lisa had become obsessed with ISIS after watching beheading videos online, including footage of British hostages being executed. Her boyfriend, Bakhtiar Mohammed Abdullah, was an Iraqi refugee who fed her extremist ideology. Together, they planned to join ISIS in Syria after eliminating what they saw as obstacles, starting with Lisa's mother, who opposed their relationship. Lisa and Abdullah stabbed her mother, Tina Romer Holtegard, 40, with a kitchen knife during a brutal attack in their family home. The violence was extreme and prolonged, with at least 20 stab wounds inflicted on the victim. After the murder, Lisa called police claiming a white man had run away, a calculated lie designed to deflect suspicion and frame an innocent person. Lisa's chilling indifference during questioning and computer evidence showing her consumption of ISIS propaganda led to her arrest. The digital trail revealed the extent of her radicalization and the methodical planning that went into the murder. In September 2015, both Lisa and Abdullah were found guilty of murder by a court in Joring, though the court couldn't determine who delivered the fatal wounds. Lisa was sentenced to 9 years, the first year in juvenile detention and the remaining 8 in prison, while Abdullah received 13 years and deportation. The sentences were upheld on appeal in January 2016. Lisa was likely released in 2024 after serving her full sentence, returning to society with blood on her hands. The next case shows how modern technology and gaming addiction can warp a teenager's mind into something truly dangerous. Daniel Petrick. On October 20th, 2007, Brighton Township, Ohio became the scene of a family shooting that would spark national debates about video game violence. The shooter was Daniel Petrick, a 16-year-old who killed his mother and critically wounded his father after they confiscated his copy of Halo 3. This wasn't just teenage anger. It was an addiction turned lethal that would destroy a family forever. But how could a video game drive a seemingly normal teenager to commit such horrific act? Daniel was described as a normal, happy teenager with no prior psychological problems or criminal record. His father, Mark, was a Pentecostal minister, and the family was deeply religious. But everything changed when Daniel contracted a staph infection and became housebound, discovering the violent video game Halo 3. He became severely addicted, playing up to 18 hours a day without eating or sleeping, which alarmed his parents. When his parents confiscated the game due to its violent content and adult rating, Daniel's obsession turned murderous. He used his father's 9mm Taurus PT-92 handgun to shoot his mother Susan multiple times, killing her, and critically wounded his father Mark with shots to the head, arms, and chest. The violence was calculated and premeditated. Daniel had taken the lockbox key earlier to access the weapon. After the shooting, Daniel attempted to stage the scene as a murder-suicide by placing the gun in his father's hand, then fled in the family minivan with his precious video game. He was caught during a police chase when he lost control of the vehicle. His sister Heidi had discovered the scene and called 911, while his surviving father identified Daniel as the shooter from his hospital bed. Daniel was tried as an adult from December 15th, 2008, with his defense arguing insanity due to video game addiction. The court rejected this defense, and on June 23, 2009, Daniel was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 23 years. He remains incarcerated at Grafton Correctional Institution in Ohio, eligible for parole in 2030. Remarkably, his father Mark publicly forgave him, reflecting their family's deep religious faith even in tragedy. But our next case reveals how twin bonds can become twisted into something far more sinister and deadly. Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah Whitehead. On January 13, 2010, Conyers, Georgia witnessed a matricide that would shock the nation with its brutality and the age of its perpetrators. The killers were Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah Whitehead, 16-year-old twins who beat and stabbed their mother to death during a family fight. This wasn't a planned murder. It was an explosion of family tension that turned lethal when sisterly solidarity became a weapon. But what could drive twin sisters to collectively turn on their own mother with such violence? The twins had a tumultuous relationship with their mother, Jarmeka Nikki Whitehead, 34, marked by ongoing family tensions and their mother's strict control. After living with their great-grandmother for years, they had recently been returned to their mother's custody against their wishes, creating a powder keg of resentment and conflict. The forced reunion became a death sentence. During the violent confrontation that started over being late for school, the twins beat their mother with a vase and stabbed her multiple times. The attack was so brutal that bite marks were found on their mother's body, evidence of the desperate struggle that took place. The crime was classified as a crime of passion, but the level of violence suggested deep-seated rage that had been building for years. Initially, the twins claimed they had found their mother dead when they came home from school. They even called 911, crying and screaming about the discovery. But inconsistencies in their stories and the physical evidence, particularly the bite marks that matched their dental records, led to their arrests on May 21, 2010. Rather than face a murder trial, both twins pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter in 2014. Tasmiyah was sentenced in January 2014, while Jasmiyah received her sentence on February 7, 2014, each receiving 30 years in prison. They are incarcerated separately at different Georgia prisons, with Tasmiyah eligible for parole in March 2026 and Jasmiyah in September 2027. The twins who once shared everything now face decades apart, paying for their shared crime. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press that bell icon. But our final case involves a teenager whose mental illness created a storm of paranoia and violence that shocked an entire community. Kip Kinkle. On May 20, 1998, Springfield, Oregon became ground zero for a massacre that would forever change how we view juvenile violence. The perpetrator was Kip Kinkle, a 15-year-old who shot his parents at home, then walked into Thurston High School the next day and opened fire on his classmates. This wasn't just a school shooting. It was a family annihilation followed by attempted mass murder that could have claimed dozens more lives. But what transforms a teenager into someone capable of killing everyone closest to him? Kip suffered from undiagnosed paranoid schizophrenia, experiencing hallucinations and delusions that convinced him his actions were necessary. He had been expelled from school for bringing a stolen handgun to campus, creating additional stress and shame. The combination of untreated mental illness and academic failure created a perfect storm of violence that would devastate multiple families. On May 20th, Kip shot and killed his parents, Bill and Faith Kinkle, at their family home. But rather than flee or surrender, he made a decision that would terrorize an entire community. The next day, May 21, 1998, Kip walked into Thurston High School armed with a semi-automatic rifle and handgun, intent on killing as many people as possible. Kip killed 2 students, Ben Walker, 16, and Michael Nicolason, 17, and wounded 25 others before being subdued by brave students who tackled him. The carnage could have been much worse if not for the heroic actions of students who risked their lives to stop him. Even after being restrained, Kip continued trying to reach for another weapon. After his arrest, Kip confessed to all crimes and pleaded guilty on September 24, 1999, foregoing an insanity defense despite clear evidence of mental illness. Judge Jack Madison sentenced him to 111 years without parole on November 11, 1999. The sentence was upheld on appeal in January 2011. He remains at Oregon State Correctional Institution, where he continues to file appeals citing juvenile justice reforms, hoping to one day see freedom again. These stories reveal the terrifying truth about juvenile violence, that age is no barrier to evil, and that the most dangerous predators can sometimes be found in our own homes. Some receive justice through life sentences, while others found ways to escape their cages through death or early release. Lorraine Thorpe. On August 2009, Ipswich, Suffolk, became the scene of crimes so disturbing they would earn a 15-year-old the title of Britain's youngest female double killer. Lorraine Thorpe tortured and murdered 41-year-old Rosalind Hunt over several days, using methods including beating, stamping, and using a cheese grater on her skin. 9 days later, she killed her own father, 43-year-old Desmond Thorpe, by smothering and beating him to prevent him from revealing her first crime. But what transforms a teenager into someone capable of such calculated cruelty? Thorpe had been part of Ipswich's street drinking culture since age 13, living in poverty and associating with a group of violent individuals. Her upbringing was marked by instability and exposure to harmful influences that gradually warped her understanding of acceptable behavior. The environment she grew up in normalized aggression and callousness, creating the perfect conditions for her descent into evil. The crimes themselves revealed a level of sadistic pleasure that shocked investigators. The torture of Rosalind Hunt wasn't quick or impulsive. It was sustained over days, suggesting Thorpe derived satisfaction from causing pain. When her father threatened to expose her, she eliminated him with the same cold calculation, demonstrating that family bonds meant nothing to her twisted mind. Following the discovery of both bodies, Thorpe was arrested and charged with double murder. Her youth didn't generate sympathy from the court, as the premeditated and sadistic nature of her crimes spoke to a deeply disturbed individual who posed a continued threat to society. In 2010, Thorpe was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 14 years. She remains incarcerated at HM Prison Foston Hall in Derbyshire, having been denied parole in October 2023. Her next parole hearing is scheduled for September 2025, though given the nature of her crimes, release seems unlikely. Our next case shows how a teenage dispute can escalate to deadly consequences when combined with poor decision-making. Shyla Hernandez Rivas. On April 2017, Lawrenceville, Georgia witnessed a tragedy that would destroy multiple families over what investigators believe was a dispute or robbery attempt gone wrong. Shyla Hernandez Rivas, just 17 years old, stabbed 21-year-old William Tunchez multiple times, ending his young life and forever altering her own future. What makes this case particularly tragic is how quickly a confrontation spiraled into irreversible consequences. But what drives a teenager to choose deadly force over walking away from conflict? The details surrounding the incident remain limited, but evidence suggests the attack likely occurred during a dispute or attempted robbery. The multiple stab wounds indicate this wasn't a single moment of poor judgment, but a sustained attack that demonstrated either panic or deliberate intent to harm. The victim, William Tunchez, was only 21 years old with his whole life ahead of him. What sets Shyla apart from many other cases is her immediate recognition of what she had done. Rather than attempting to flee or cover up her crime, she made the decision to turn herself in to the authorities. This action suggests some level of remorse or understanding of the gravity of her actions, though it came too late to save her victim's life. Hernandez Rivas turned herself in after the crime, cooperating with law enforcement. Her willingness to accept responsibility may have influenced the legal proceedings, as prosecutors and judges often consider such cooperation when determining charges and sentencing. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, acknowledging her role in Tunchez's death. The court sentenced her to 11 to 27.5 years in prison, with parole eligibility in 2033. She currently remains incarcerated, serving a sentence that will likely keep her behind bars for most of her 20s and into her 30s. But our next case involves one of the youngest killers in recent memory, whose obsession with fictional characters led to real-world horror. Morgan Geyser. On May 31, 2014, Waukesha, Wisconsin, became the setting for one of the most bizarre and disturbing attempted murders in recent American history. Morgan Geyser, just 12 years old, stabbed her friend Peyton Leutner 19 times in a desperate attempt to appease the fictional character known as Slender Man. This case shocked the nation not just because of the young age of the perpetrator, but because it revealed how online fiction could influence vulnerable minds to commit real-world harm. But how does a 12-year-old become so disconnected from reality that fiction becomes more compelling than friendship? Geyser had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, experiencing delusions that included believing she could communicate with fictional characters. Her mental illness, combined with exposure to disturbing online content, created a perfect storm that would nearly cost her best friend's life. The Slender Man character, a tall, faceless figure from internet folklore, had become so real in Geyser's mind that she believed she needed to kill to prove her devotion. The attack took place during what was supposed to be a fun sleepover celebration. Geyser and her accomplice lured Peyton into a wooded area under the pretense of playing hide-and-seek. Once isolated, they launched their assault, leaving Peyton with 19 stab wounds, including injuries that barely missed major arteries. Miraculously, Peyton survived by crawling to a road where a cyclist found her. The case became controversial due to Geyser's young age and diagnosed mental health conditions. Legal experts debated whether someone so young could truly understand the consequences of their actions, especially when influenced by severe mental illness and online manipulation. Geyser was arrested after the attack and eventually pleaded guilty in 2018. Initially sentenced to 40 years to life, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity in 2017 and committed to a mental health institution. In January 2025, she was released from the Winnebago Mental Health Institute and now lives in a group home in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, under conditional release with supervision until 2058. The next case involves another family tragedy where teenage frustration exploded into deadly consequences. Cassandra Bjorhe. On April 2017, Lawrenceville, Georgia witnessed another family annihilation when teenagers chose murder over communication with their guardians. Cassandra Bjorhe, 17 years old, along with her boyfriend Johnny Ryder, killed her grandparents Wendy and Randall Bjorge, then remained in the house with the bodies while hosting parties. The case shocked investigators not just for its brutality, but for the callous behavior that followed. But how do teenagers become so detached from humanity that they can celebrate while surrounded by the victims of their own crimes? The couple had been staying in the Bjorhe home, and after committing the murders, they continued living there with the decomposing bodies. This behavior suggests either complete psychological detachment or a level of comfort with death that defies normal human responses. The fact that they invited friends over for parties while the victims lay nearby reveals a disturbing lack of empathy. The decision to remain at the crime scene for an extended period indicates poor planning and possibly a belief that they could continue indefinitely without consequences. Their behavior during this time, partying and carrying on normal social activities, demonstrated a complete disconnection between their actions and any sense of guilt or responsibility. Law enforcement eventually discovered the situation and arrested both teenagers. The evidence was overwhelming, given that they had essentially been living at the crime scene for days or weeks after the murders. Both Cassandra and her boyfriend pleaded guilty to the murders in 2018. They were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 60 years, meaning neither will be eligible for release until around 2078. Cassandra remains incarcerated, facing the reality that she will likely spend most of her life behind bars for choosing murder over finding healthy ways to resolve family conflicts. But our next case proves that even brief encounters can turn deadly when teenagers make impulsive decisions. Jordan Jobson. On August 2007, Wallsend, North Tyneside, England, became the scene of a deadly altercation that would forever change multiple lives. Jordan Jobson, just 15 years old, stabbed 18-year-old Samantha Magin multiple times during what investigators believe was a fight influenced by alcohol and substance use. The case highlights how quickly teenage disputes can escalate to irreversible tragedy. But what transforms a typical teenage argument into a deadly encounter that destroys multiple families? The altercation occurred during circumstances where both alcohol and controlled substances were believed to be factors, impairing judgment and escalating what might otherwise have been a minor disagreement. The presence of a knife transformed a potentially minor scuffle into a deadly encounter that would haunt everyone involved. Samantha Magin was only 18 years old, just beginning her adult life when it was cut tragically short. The 3-year age gap between victim and perpetrator highlights how young people can become involved in dangerous situations that spiral beyond their control or comprehension. Following the stabbing, Jobson was arrested and charged with murder. The evidence against her was substantial, leading to a conviction that would result in significant prison time despite her young age. In 2008, Jobson was convicted and initially sentenced to life with a minimum term of 15 years. However, this was later reduced to 11 years on appeal, reflecting considerations of her youth and the circumstances surrounding the crime. She was released on license in December 2020, but returned to prison in May 2021 for breaching the conditions of her release. Her current status remains unclear, with no updates available since 2021. The case demonstrates the ongoing challenges of reintegrating young offenders into society and the difficulties they face in rebuilding their lives after committing serious crimes. If you've made it this far and enjoyed deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button. But our next case involves one of the most brutal family attacks in recent memory, where mental illness became a weapon of unimaginable destruction. Isabella Guzman. On August 28, 2013, Aurora, Colorado witnessed one of the most horrifying family homicides in the state's history. Isabella Guzman, 18 years old, attacked her mother Yun Mi Hoy in their bathroom, inflicting 79 separate stab wounds in an assault so sustained and brutal that investigators struggled to comprehend the level of rage involved. The case would expose the tragic consequences of untreated mental illness in young adults. But what drives someone to inflict 79 separate wounds on their own mother? Guzman was suffering from severe schizophrenia that had gone undiagnosed and untreated, causing delusions and paranoia that completely distorted her perception of reality. The mental illness had progressed to the point where she no longer recognized her mother as a loving parent, but instead viewed her as a threat that needed to be eliminated. Mental health experts later explained how schizophrenia can completely alter family relationships in the mind of the sufferer. The attack occurred in the family bathroom, a confined space that made the sustained assault even more horrifying. The 79 wounds indicated this wasn't a brief moment of rage, but an extended attack where Guzman had multiple opportunities to stop, but continued inflicting harm. Each wound represented another moment where normal human emotions and familial bonds should have intervened, but were absent due to her severe mental illness. The aftermath revealed both the depth of Guzman's psychological disturbance and some remaining connection to reality. She turned herself in to authorities after the attack, suggesting that despite her severe mental illness, some part of her understood the gravity of her actions. However, her behavior during police interviews demonstrated the extent of her psychological disconnection. In 2014, Guzman was found not guilty by reason of insanity, a verdict that recognized her severe mental illness as the primary factor in her mother's death. Rather than facing prison, she was committed to a mental health facility where she could receive appropriate psychiatric treatment. As of 2021, she remained in a mental hospital with no recent updates on her condition or potential release. Her case continues to serve as a stark reminder of the importance of early mental health intervention and the tragic consequences when severe psychological conditions go unrecognized and untreated. Our next case shows how a simple date can turn deadly when teenage impulsiveness meets poor decision-making. Emma Cusack. On June 29, 2023, Las Vegas, Nevada became the scene of a shocking murder that would expose the dangerous reality of modern dating and teenage impulsiveness. Emma Cusack, 17 years old, shot Charlie Satrustegui twice in the head during an argument at the Luxor Hotel. The case highlights how quickly casual encounters can turn deadly when combined with access to weapons and poor impulse control. But what transforms a dating dispute into cold-blooded execution in a matter of minutes? The incident occurred during what was supposed to be a casual encounter between Cusack and Satrustegui, who was 36 years old. The significant age gap raises questions about the nature of their relationship and the circumstances that brought them together. The hotel setting suggests this was a planned meeting, making the subsequent escalation to deadly force even more shocking. The argument that preceded the shooting appears to have been impulsive rather than premeditated, but research suggests the act itself was a calculated decision rather than an accident. The fact that Cusack shot Satrustegui twice in the head indicates either panic-driven overkill or a deliberate attempt to ensure he wouldn't survive. Following the shooting, Cusack demonstrated some level of awareness of her actions by contacting authorities herself. She turned herself in after calling police, suggesting that despite the impulsive nature of the crime, she understood she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Cusack pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, acknowledging her role in Satrustegui's death. She was sentenced to 11 to 27.5 years in prison, with parole eligibility in 2033. She remains incarcerated, serving a sentence that will keep her behind bars through her 20s and possibly into her 30s, paying the price for a moment of deadly impulsiveness. But our final case involves perhaps the most prolific young female killer on this list, whose domestic disputes escalated to double homicide. Leslie Garcia Juarez. Between December 2019 and December 2020, Duluth and Norcross, Georgia became the scenes of two separate homicides that would eventually be connected to the same teenage perpetrator. Leslie Garcia Juarez, just 16 years old, shot and killed two young men, Osiel Montano and Adaf Imable, in what investigators believe were domestic-related disputes. The case represents one of the most prolific examples of teenage female violence in recent Georgia history. But what drives a 16-year-old to commit not one but two separate murders within a year? The first murder occurred on December 30th, 2019, when Juarez shot Osiel Montano in Norcross. Almost exactly 1 year later, she shot Adaf Imable on December 29th, 2020, in Duluth. Both cases were described as domestic-related, suggesting personal relationships gone wrong rather than random acts of aggression. The fact that both victims were young men in their early 20s, and both incidents were classified as domestic-related, suggests a pattern of behavior where Juarez resorted to deadly force to resolve personal conflicts. The year between murders indicates this wasn't a crime of passion, but potentially a learned response to relationship problems. The investigation process revealed the connection between the two cases. Juarez was first arrested for Amabel's murder on December 31, 2020. While in custody, she was charged with Montano's murder on March 19, 2021, suggesting investigators had connected evidence from both scenes. Despite her young age, Juarez was charged as an adult due to the severity and repetitive nature of her crimes. However, no sentencing information is available, and her current status remains unknown as of 2025, leaving questions about how the justice system ultimately handled this unprecedented case of teenage serial homicide. Nyang Mai Chamdual. On March 7, 2022, Des Moines, Iowa witnessed one of the most shocking school-related shootings in the state's history. Nyang Mai Chamdual, just 14 years old, participated in a coordinated drive-by shooting outside East High School that killed 15-year-old Jose David Lopez and critically injured two others. This wasn't a spontaneous act of teenage violence. It was a carefully planned execution carried out by multiple shooters from 3 vehicles. But what drives a 14-year-old to become a cold-blooded killer in broad daylight? The attack was described as a bloodthirsty revenge mission, following an earlier incident at Chamdual's family home, part of an ongoing gang rivalry that had been escalating for months. Chamdual fired shots from a .38 revolver from the back seat of a Ford F-150 truck, part of a coordinated attack involving 10 teenagers. The precision and planning of the assault showed a level of organization that shocked investigators and revealed the sophisticated nature of modern gang warfare. The victims were innocent students simply trying to get an education. Jose David Lopez was just 15 years old when his life was cut short, while 16-year-old Jessica Lopez and 18-year-old Kemery Ortega fought for their lives in critical condition. The shooting occurred during school hours, turning what should have been a safe space into a crime scene. Parents arriving to pick up their children were met with police tape and ambulances, forever changing their perception of school safety. What makes this case particularly disturbing is how easily a 14-year-old was recruited into such violence. The gang structure that facilitated this attack represents a broader crisis in American cities, where children are being weaponized for adult conflicts. The systematic nature of the recruitment process means that Chamdual was likely groomed for violence long before he ever pulled the trigger. Chamdual was identified through surveillance footage and witness accounts, leading to his arrest as part of a larger group of 10 individuals charged in connection with the shooting. On July 21, 2023, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. On May 30, 2025, at age 17, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years and ordered to pay $150,000 in restitution. He remains incarcerated at the Boys State Training School in Eldora, where he has earned his high school diploma, showing that even behind bars, rehabilitation efforts continue. Our next case shows how gang initiation can transform a teenager into a remorseless killer over something as trivial as a traffic accident. Remy Cordova. On February 20th, 2021, Denver, Colorado became the scene of a senseless murder that would expose the deadly reality of gang recruitment. Remy Cordova, just 14 years old, killed 32-year-old Pamela Cabriales with an AR-15 after a minor traffic collision near Colfax Avenue and Interstate 25. This wasn't road rage, it was calculated murder designed to prove his worth to the East Side Crips gang. But how does a minor fender bender escalate to cold-blooded execution in a matter of minutes? Prosecutors argued that Cordova's actions were motivated by a desire to gain status within the East Side Crips gang, describing the killing as senseless and cold-blooded. The victim, Pamela Cabriales, was an accomplished real estate agent and mother whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The randomness of her selection made the crime even more terrifying, as it demonstrated that anyone could become a victim of gang violence. Cordova's background reveals a disturbing pattern of childhood trauma that unfortunately characterizes many young gang recruits. Court records indicate he had endured near-constant physical, emotional, and inappropriate treatment from a young age, which may have contributed to his violent behavior and susceptibility to gang recruitment. However, this background didn't excuse his actions or generate sympathy from the court, as thousands of children face similar trauma without turning to murder. Following a police investigation, Cordova was charged as an adult due to the severity of his crimes. On November 1st, 2024, he was convicted of first-degree murder. During his sentencing, Cordova showed no remorse and continued to claim innocence despite overwhelming evidence against him, demonstrating a complete lack of accountability for his actions. On December 12, 2024, at age 18, Cordova was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 40 years, plus an additional 8 years for attempted murder to be served consecutively. He will not be eligible for parole until 2064, ensuring this dangerous young man remains behind bars for decades. But our next case involves a school shooter whose lack of remorse shocked an entire community: Thomas T.J. Lane. On February 27, 2012, Chardon High School in Ohio became the site of one of the most chilling school shootings in American history. T.J., 17 years old, opened fire with a .22 caliber handgun, killing 3 students: Demetrius Hewlin, 16, Russell King Jr., 17, and Daniel Parmertor, 16, and injuring 3 others. What made this case particularly disturbing wasn't just the violence, but Lane's complete lack of remorse and his taunting of victims' families. But what could drive a teenager to commit such calculated violence against his own classmates? Lane's motive remains unclear to this day, with investigators finding no specific reason for targeting his victims. Court documents revealed a tumultuous family background marked by domestic violence, but nothing that adequately explained his actions. He was a student at an alternative school and had difficulty socializing, but thousands of teenagers face similar challenges without turning to mass violence. The attack itself was swift and calculated. Lane entered the school cafeteria during the morning before classes and began firing indiscriminately at students who were simply trying to start their day. The randomness of his target selection made the crime even more terrifying, as it demonstrated that anyone could have been a victim. Lane was arrested near his car outside the school shortly after the shooting, identified through witness accounts. What happened next shocked even seasoned court observers. During his sentencing hearing, Lane showed up wearing a t-shirt with the word "killer" written on it and proceeded to taunt the families of his victims, showing no remorse whatsoever. Lane pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced on March 19, 2013, at age 18, to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He remains incarcerated at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, where he has a history of disciplinary problems, including a 2014 escape attempt. He will never be eligible for parole, ensuring he stays behind bars for his crimes. The next case takes us to a family home where a teenager's violence knew no bounds: Joseph Spencer. On September 3, 2012, Doddridge County, West Virginia became the scene of a family massacre that would leave an entire community searching for answers. Joseph Spencer, just 16 years old, murdered his parents, Frederick Arthur Spencer III, 49, and Dixie Lee Spencer, 47, along with his 9-year-old sister Patience Spencer, using a 9mm handgun. What made this case even more chilling was Spencer's decision to call 911 and turn himself in immediately after the killings. But what could drive a seemingly quiet teenager to wipe out his entire family in one night of violence? Spencer was described as quiet and intelligent, with no prior record of violence, making his crimes all the more shocking to those who knew him. His grandfather suggested the acts were not premeditated and might have been related to an undiagnosed mental health issue, but investigators never determined a clear motive. The randomness and brutality of the killings suggested a complete break from reality. The murders took place in the family's rural home, where Spencer systematically killed each member of his immediate family. The fact that he included his 9-year-old sister Patience in his violent spree demonstrated a level of callousness that defied comprehension. After the killings, Spencer immediately called emergency services to report what he had done. Spencer turned himself in by calling 911 after committing the murders, demonstrating some awareness of his actions but offering no explanation for his violence. His cooperation with authorities did little to mitigate the severity of his crimes. On January 16, 2014, Spencer pleaded guilty to all charges. On February 10, 2014, at age 18, he was sentenced to 3 life sentences, 2 concurrent and 1 consecutive, making him eligible for parole after 30 years. He remains incarcerated in a West Virginia prison and will be eligible for parole in 2044. But our next case shows how territorial disputes can lead to deadly cases of mistaken identity. Codeshai Westcott and Riley Tolliver. On January 27, 2024, Bristol, UK witnessed a double murder that would expose the deadly reality of postcode rivalries among British youth. Codeshai Westcott, 17, and Riley Tolliver, 18, along with 2 other teenagers, murdered 15-year-old Mason Rist and 16-year-old Max Dixon in a case of mistaken identity. The victims were completely innocent, killed simply because they happened to be in the wrong area at the wrong time. But how did a territorial dispute over postcodes escalate to the murder of 2 innocent teenagers? The murders were revenge for bricks being thrown at a house in a rival area, part of an ongoing postcode rivalry between different neighborhoods in Bristol. Mason Rist and Max Dixon were simply friends walking through Knoll West when they were mistakenly identified as being connected to the earlier incident. Their only crime was living in the area. The attack was swift and brutal. The 4 attackers, armed with weapons, confronted the 2 boys and launched a savage assault that left both victims fatally wounded. The randomness of the selection and the innocence of the victims made this case particularly tragic for the Bristol community. The killers were arrested at the scene, with CCTV evidence proving crucial in securing convictions. The technology that captured their crimes ensured there was no escape from justice, despite their attempts to flee. Both Westcott and Tolliver were convicted of 2 counts of murder. On December 19, 2024, Westcott was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 23 years and 44 days, while Tolliver received 23 years and 47 days. Both will be eligible for parole in 2047. In a shocking display of continued callousness, Westcott set up an Instagram account in January 2025 to post rap tracks gloating about the murders, prompting an investigation by authorities. The next case involves one of the youngest killers on our list, whose claim of self-defense couldn't hide his violent history, Leighton Ames. On October 3, 2022, Gateshead, UK became the scene of a deadly knife attack that would expose the violent tendencies lurking beneath a baby-faced exterior. Leighton Ames, just 14 years old, stabbed 14-year-old Tomasz Oleszak to death in White Hills Nature Park, also slashing another youth's coat during the same incident. Despite his young age and innocent appearance, Amies had a disturbing history of violent behavior. But what drives a 14-year-old to carry a knife and use it to eliminate another child? Amies had a documented history of behavioral issues, including being excluded from primary school for threatening to stab a teacher and from secondary school for arson. These warning signs painted a picture of an increasingly violent young man whose behavior was escalating towards something truly dangerous. His decision to carry a knife demonstrated premeditation and awareness of his violent intentions. During the attack in White Hills Nature Park, Amies claimed he was acting in self-defense, but evidence suggested otherwise. The judge noted that while Amies was not the instigator of the confrontation, he had deliberately brought the knife to the scene. The prosecution argued that the stabbing was deliberate and that Amies had shown no remorse for his actions. Amies was arrested shortly after the incident, with his prior violent history becoming crucial evidence in the case against him. His pattern of escalating violence made it clear that this tragedy was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of years of concerning behavior. On April 17, 2023, Amies was convicted of murder. On June 15, 2023, at age 15, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 12 years. An attempt to refer his sentence as unduly lenient was rejected in December 2023. He will be eligible for parole in 2035. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press that bell icon. But our next case involves perhaps the most disturbing attack on this list, one that targeted the most innocent victims imaginable. Axel Rutacubana. On July 29, 2024, Southport, UK witnessed one of the most horrific attacks against children in the country's recent history. Axel Rutacubana, 17 years old, carried out a mass stabbing at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class, killing 3 young girls, Alice da Silva Aguirre, 9, B.B. King, 6, and Elsie Stancombe, 7, and injuring 10 others. The attack was described as sadistic and represented a level of evil that shocked even hardened investigators. But what could possibly motivate a teenager to target innocent children at a dance class? Rutacubana, born August 7, 2006, to Rwandan parents in Cardiff, had a documented history of concerning behavior. He had been referred to the Prevent program for concerns about radicalization between 2019 and 2021, but authorities determined no intervention was necessary. His obsession with violence and access to extremist materials should have been red flags that demanded immediate action. The attack itself was planned and methodical, representing months of preparation and planning. Evidence found during the investigation included ricin production materials and an Al-Qaeda training manual, suggesting this was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a carefully orchestrated assault designed to maximize casualties. The fact that he targeted a children's dance class made his crimes particularly heinous and demonstrated his complete lack of humanity. What makes this case even more disturbing is the systematic failure of multiple agencies to prevent this tragedy. Despite being on the radar of various authorities for years, Rutacubana was able to plan and execute one of the most horrific attacks against children in recent British history. The missed opportunities to intervene will haunt the families of his victims forever. Rutacubana was arrested at the scene after admitting his guilt, showing no remorse for the innocent lives he had taken. His behavior after the attack, including gloating about his actions, demonstrated a complete lack of human empathy or understanding of the magnitude of his crimes. On January 20th, 2025, Rutacubana pleaded guilty to all charges. 3 days later, on January 23rd, 2025, at age 18, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 52 years. A request to review his sentence as unduly lenient was rejected in February 2025. He will not be eligible for parole until 2076. In May 2025, He allegedly attacked a prison officer at HMP Belmarsh by throwing boiling water, showing his violent behavior continues even behind bars. But our final case proves that some teenage violence defies all logic and reason. Kieran Earnshaw and Luke Gaukroger. On January 16, 2020, Huddersfield, UK witnessed one of the most senseless and brutal murders in the area's history. Kieran Earnshaw, 18, and Luke Gaukroger, 15, murdered 53-year-old Robert Wilson outside Thornton and Ross using a samurai sword, striking him over 100 times and attempting to decapitate him. The attack was so savage that it shocked even experienced investigators who had seen countless violent crimes. But what could drive two teenagers to commit such an incredibly brutal and senseless murder? Both attackers were heavily intoxicated with alcohol and drugs during the assault, with no clear motive for targeting Robert Wilson. The victim was simply a night shift supervisor trying to do his job when he encountered these two violent individuals. The randomness of his selection made the crime even more disturbing. Earnshaw had a documented history of knife-related offenses, including stabbing a boy at school, suggesting a pattern of escalating violence that culminated in this horrific murder. His prior behavior should have been a warning sign of the danger he posed to society. The attack was captured on CCTV and audio equipment, providing investigators with clear evidence of the brutal assault. The footage showed the sustained and vicious nature of the attack, with over 100 strikes delivered to the helpless victim. The evidence was so overwhelming that both defendants had no choice but to plead guilty. The case also revealed the callous attitude of the killers toward their crime. Gaukroger wrote rap lyrics boasting about the murder, showing no remorse for taking an innocent man's life. This demonstrated a complete lack of understanding about the gravity of their actions. Both Earnshaw and Gaukroger pleaded guilty to murder. On September 2, 2020, Earnshaw was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 22 years, while Gaukroger received 16 years and 8 months. Earnshaw will be eligible for parole in 2042, while Gaukroger could be released as early as 2036. From gang initiations to family annihilations to random acts of brutality, these young killers have earned their place behind bars for life. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.